Good morning, everyone. It's a great pleasure to have you all here. So today, the first discussion is about Hong Kong's future. I think by now, you have heard enough from the President Xi Jinping down to Director Xia Baolong repeatedly said that China still see Hong Kong as a very special place, and that the commitment to the one country, two system will remain unchanged. Now, by now, there's no doubt that Beijing's commitment to Hong Kong will remain as firm as ever. But then Hong Kong right now is operating in a very different environment compared with just 5 years ago. So today, I think it's a great pleasure that we have a panel of experts who are really experts on China and on Hong Kong. So I want to ask them is that Hong Kong used to have this role as the bridge between China and the Western world. But today's world seems to be defined by the rivalry between China and the US. Now, how can you have a future when your role is the bridge, but the other side seems to be only interested in the high fence and the small yard, particularly for the financial sector? So how to operate in such a different and difficult environment? What kind of strategy Hong Kong should adopt? So I want to first ask John and Helen about this question.
Yeah, sure. Thank you. I want to say that Hong Kong still remains as an important bridge between China and the Western world. And I think over the past few years, the Hong Kong positioning is even more clear in terms of how we are connecting, right? Despite the geopolitical situation and the U.S. and China relations. Over the past few years, I think through the different initiatives, by the Hong Kong government, together with the support of the Chinese government, it's getting more and more prominent of how Hong Kong is being used, right? The role as the international gateway for China. Okay. For myself, if I'm in the finance industry, I would probably spend a few minutes talking about what we have achieved, right, in terms of on the finance side and how we position Hong Kong from a financial market perspective. Obviously, beyond that, there's still a lot of things we're doing on trade and other things that also position Hong Kong as the international gateway. But on finance side, you look at the development of the Hong Kong financial markets. One is on new listings, right? Over the past few years, we have a number of new initiatives that's implemented by the Hong Kong Stock Exchange in terms of new listing rules, including the chapter on biotech, and also the chapter on SPAC, and most recently, chapter 18C, which is on specialized tech. All of this is to encourage more companies, not only from China, but also from international companies to consider Hong Kong as a listing venue, to place Hong Kong as one of the key international financial markets along the US, as well as London. I think all these initiatives, you have seen the interest coming out from different companies is been increasing. Secondly is on the international companies to list in Hong Kong. Right? In the past, obviously, Hong Kong has been perceived as a listing venue, for Chinese companies, right? And a lot of international companies will want to list in other international boards. But through the different initiatives that the exchange has been doing, we have seen increased interest of global international companies consider either a dual primary, or a secondary listing in Hong Kong. And this further cements, Hong Kong positioning in the international marketplace. Thirdly is on the RMB. I think a lot of the initiatives have been put in place to further develop using Hong Kong as the RMB trading facility, for both fundraising as well as on the currency. Just like yesterday, you have seen the news that now of the dual currency that were implemented by the Hong Kong Stock Exchange, with the initial 20 plus companies being approved on the dual currency trading. So I think all this are a few examples of how Hong Kong role has remained to be a key gateway, for China and to connect China, to the international markets.
Thank you. I want to add maybe a few points to what John already said. I very much agree with his points on the from a financial point of view, how Hong Kong could play a more important role. At the same time, I would also suggest that maybe in addition to finance, I think there is much more that Hong Kong can do. In history, we don't have to go back to many, many years ago, but at least 40, 50 years ago, Hong Kong was actually taking pride in being a very important conduit for mainland China with the outside of world. At the moment, we obviously do not have to carry on the same responsibilities to the same extent. But I would say at a time when misunderstanding between China and the West probably has been rising, this is a great opportunity for Hong Kong to shine, not only in finance, but also think about technology, think about potentially education. I just read the news on the way here saying that actually more and more Chinese students, including this year, who have become more interested in studying in Hong Kong colleges, not just universities that we have been more familiar with, but also some colleges. So I think that many things have been evolving, and that we should definitely see Hong Kong with a more dynamic perspective. That's I think that's the first thing I want to mention. Not just finance, Hong Kong can do more. And secondly, I also want to mention that U.S. and China relationship is probably in straits right now, but we're seeing some turnaround, right? Blinken was there, talk was ongoing, and maybe there will be mutual visits, state visits of the top leaders later in the year. But while we remain hopeful, we shouldn't forget the fact that beyond China-US relationship, there is a lot of other countries in the world. So I would say even if at the time when there could be some country probably becoming more defensive in certain ways, Hong Kong can definitely play a very important bridging role, right? With Europe, between China and Europe, and with Middle East. Right now, a lot of business is going through Hong Kong, and also Africa, Latam. So the world is not just about the US or the Five Eyes country, right? We can do a whole lot more. And last but not least, I would mention that Hong Kong is probably also going to see now increasingly. I just spoke to some young people over the weekend that it is going to be the new culture center. That's something that people like our age probably are not used to anymore, because when we were very little, I grew up in Beijing, and Hong Kong was always the pop culture the very top of the pop culture in East Asia. But right now, this has largely changed. But maybe in the future, the young generation are seeing it differently, and they are coming back again. So we think that with cultural exchange, there is a lot more that Hong Kong can do. Thank you.
And Professor?
Yeah, I agree with John and Helen, the points they just made. I just want to add one point is that probably one thing we see into the future of Hong Kong is the commitment of the central leadership and the local government in terms of maintaining the original way of governance, especially the one country, two systems framework here. I see that as a very important factor of certainty in the time of uncertainty and in the time of Sino-US rivalry.
Yeah, I agree. I think that today's Hong Kong can still be a very viable place for China in terms that in the past Hong Kong is mainly connecting China with the Western world, but now Hong Kong can still serve this bridging role, not just connecting with the US and the Western world, but also with the Belt and Road countries, etc. And also we need to broaden our industry. So like Helen says, including the culture, including the technology, etc. So part of the national development strategy is actually seeing Hong Kong not only as an isolated city, but a part of this Greater Bay Area. This Greater Bay Area, actually, whenever I have the opportunity to go out and talk to people from other countries, they're very much interested. Now, on paper, this seems to be a great idea, right? It's the Greater Bay Area today, the economy is already equivalent to the economy of Italy. And its population size is the population of the whole Germany. And it has Hong Kong as the global financial center, and Shenzhen is China's Silicon Valley. And we have Asia's Vegas in Macau. So on paper, it has a lot of strengths. But the people also ask that it also has a lot of unique challenges you only find in GBA. Because the physical size is only about as big as Croatia, but it has 3 different currencies, 3 different judiciary systems, 3 different government systems, and the professional recognition body can be very different. So the big question is how Hong Kong can really take the advantage of the GBA idea, but at the same time also remain its unique identity and the strengths. So I know Professor Yan, you have been very closely following the development of GBA. So can you share some insight?
Yeah, I think the GBA is a great scheme for Hong Kong's future development. And in my view, I think Hong Kong naturally has already played a leadership role in terms of the GBA program. And we have made a lot of progress in the past several years, despite of the COVID pandemic. However, I think there's more to do in the future in terms of Hong Kong playing a coordinating role and in terms of the development of the whole area. In my view, I think the most important thing, the priority is the facilitating of communication of capital, of human beings, of people, and of course of information. For now, I think people always complain that when you travel in the Great Bay Area, it's more difficult than you would have traveled in Europe. So this is a challenge, but it's also an opportunity, and opportunity for further dynamism for the Greater Bay Area. I think Hong Kong and the Hong Kong SAR government should play a very proactive role in terms of promoting that, promoting the communication of people, of capital, of information within the Greater Bay Area. I think that's a very important thing to do.
I want to maybe add just one thing. I think the difference is maybe having both pros and cons at the same time, in the sense that only if that we have some differences, for example, in Hong Kong, in Macau, and in mainland China, so that it actually makes communication more important, and also at the same time, for example, if you have different concerts, different kind of program, movies, it would attract more young people to come, right, to from one area to the other, just to see the difference. That's one. At the same time, as Professor Yan just mentioned, I think there is also a very important fact, which is the legal system difference, allowing different kind of business to thrive in different environment. Hong Kong has the benefit of having the legal system and also a peg, the currency system, that allows this place, such a small city, to thrive, become such a big international financial hub. I don't necessarily think this is all by accident. If you look at the history, and actually, not too many cities can do that very easily, even by design. So we think that a lot of what we currently have might have some reasons to stay, but such differences can be worked out, especially if we could, as Professor Yan said, continue to promote the exchanges of people and promote the communication.
Yeah, one last point for me, I think, is besides finance, right, for our position in GBA, I think trade and transport is also a very big strength of how Hong Kong is being positioned in the GBA. I think one thing that we all be very proud of is the Hong Kong airport, right? I mean, if you look at the way, obviously, the Hong Kong airport operates and how it's positioned as a sort of main airport hub, international hub within GBA is very important. And I think we're only at the beginning of all this. And I think now with the post-COVID, travel is back. And you can see the Hong Kong airport is now also re-ramping up in terms of the flights and the capacity, obviously with the third runway being in place. I think this is very important because at the end of the day, right, from a global positioning perspective, trade flow, people's flow is very important, and I think airport plays a very important role, and it's very clear that how Hong Kong, from that perspective, being played from a GBA as well.
Thanks. I think I can say that I can summarize it as so the diversity can both be a potential liability, but also a unique strength for the GBA. So I think that diversity is not only important for GBA, but also for Hong Kong, because traditionally, Hong Kong's economic has been very narrowly based on the financial sector, the property sector, and very few other sectors. But in the new national development strategy, actually Beijing's vision for Hong Kong is for Hong Kong to become more diverse economically and have a more growth pillar to support its development. And one of the area actually can be quite new to Hong Kong is actually technology, science, and innovation. So I actually want to ask John and Helen, you are the veteran in the financial sector. You know that Hong Kong has always been China and Asia's the place for transaction. But when it comes to developing technology, it seems to be a quite new idea to us. So how can Hong Kong, do we really have advantage in developing science and technology?
At the moment, not too much, but I do think that there could be more opportunities to come. The reason why I said not too much is because I think traditionally this is not the place where, let's say, housing affordability is low enough for academics to focus on, technology and to focus on this. But we think things are changing very quickly, right? So number one, I think that we are in Hong Kong, we have the access to Google, to different research website, etc. So that compared to, for example, some of the other GBA cities, I think that we actually do have the better access to information, which is critical for technology innovation, not only for the very basic research, but also for the cutting edge, commercialization. At the same time, I would say the close connection with the financial world. People like John, right? They would be able to bring in the money. Think about the success story in Silicon Valley. That's not the most affordable place in the US either, right? It never was in the 1970s, nor it is even today. But it was able to combine technology and also the venture capital together very successfully and then make it commercialized at a certain point. So I think that we could potentially have that advantage as well. Not exactly the most natural thing at the moment, but I think that is a potential if John and colleagues can work harder.
Yeah. Yes, but I think one area on the technology side, I think which Hong Kong really has a very good differentiation is on life sciences, right? I mean, we all know Hong Kong has one of the best, medical and science platform. And I think obviously with the Hong Kong Science Park, I know in the past few years we've been working very hard to attract more companies in the life science space to come to Hong Kong, right? To establish either their regional headquarters or global headquarters or their at least R&D sort of center in Hong Kong. And we've seen quite a number of successful cases so far. And I think we're only at the beginning, of this trend, right? And the sort of support that Hong Kong has been giving to those companies is just not just asking them to come to Hong Kong, but they provide a lot of resources. And a lot of times you have seen Science Park, Cyberport, also HKMAO has invested in a lot of this startup and new companies in the life science space. So I think from a medical service perspective and healthcare service perspective, I think that segment of the life science technology aspect, Hong Kong clearly differentiates from the rest of China, and I think it's one area that I think Hong Kong has continued to leverage, coupled together obviously with the strength we have, in the financial markets and on the human capital, right, to further strengthen our position from that perspective.
So I think one of the immediate challenge for Hong Kong right now, of course, is the talent shortage, the manpower shortage. I think no matter which sector you look at, They're basically saying that we know that there's a lot of potential for us to grow, but then it's really hard to get the right talent. And we're facing competition as well from cities like Singapore, Shanghai. Literally, everyone is trying to get the top talent for them to grow. And Hong Kong right now is, no matter which sector, is complaining about this problem loudly. I know that the Hong Kong government has already initiated a number of measures to tackle this problem. But right now we have the experts and also very experienced industry practitioners here. So I want to ask from your point of view, what do you think the Hong Kong government can do more to help us to solve this talent problem? What will be the short-term strategy and what will be the long-term strategy?
Yeah, let me start off with the question. I think talent is a very important factor for Hong Kong's future development. As I work in the University of Hong Kong, we have been in a constant global search for talent because all of our faculty positions will undergo a global search for the best candidate. So we have been probably on the frontier in terms of searching for talent. From my experience, I think the most important thing our candidates consider whether they would accept an offer from Hong Kong U is about housing. Because for people who used to teach in the United States or United Kingdom, when they consider whether they should come back to Hong Kong or come to Hong Kong for a teaching job, they would always ask what kind of housing options are there, and they are always shocked by the market price of housing. So for Hong Kong U, we provide large faculty housing for our colleagues, so that should not be a problem. But I just imagine that in the financial market or in the industry, that could be more of a problem, especially for mid-level or more junior industrial participants. So I would say Hong Kong government could do much more in terms of solving the housing issue for young talent who are willing to come to Hong Kong.
I probably have a slightly different opinion. I mean, at the moment, I think that we can probably leave it. We will probably be better off if we leave such housing subsidies with the, institutions that are working on such talent. For example, think about a professor or a tenured professor, right, about to be hired by Hong Kong U or one of these most prominent universities. I think it's probably up to the university to provide the subsidy at a time when I think the government still needs to address all the economic, social housing problems at the moment, which is very acute as well. But then something probably cannot be left to the market to address, which is, I think more urgently, we are seeing a depletion of talent. Last year, media reported that there were 60,000 Hong Kong people who left permanently by, basically reporting to the government and taking their pension away, et cetera, that they're leaving for sure. But this year, so far, we have seen a very fast kind of injection of liquidity, not liquidity, but the liquidity of talents from Youcai Jihua, the special talent program. And we're talking about more than 10,000 already, and we're probably going to hit 20,000 within a few weeks. And then by the end of this year, we can see this program probably bringing in more talents from mainland China and also the rest of the world. So I think that what it can allow us to see is more freedom like this, which is at a place like UBS or B of A, we have no problem getting the sponsorship for visa. If we are working as the managing director at a large financial institutions, most likely we will get the visa. But then how about those who want to start up? We just mentioned that we want more technology, we want more cutting edge stuff, But not everybody would start from this level, right? We should allow more people with the credentials, maybe education credentials, but not so much financial credentials, to actually start over here and see Hong Kong as their potential, incubator place, right? To start from the scratch. So that, I think, is something that the current program is allowing more people to do, and I see that as a very important point to keep. Thank you.
Yeah, I want to add is that from a talent perspective, I think we look at both from an internal as well as from an external perspective. I think during the past few years of COVID, obviously there been a lot of news reports about a lot of people moving out from Hong Kong, a lot of expats moving back to their home countries or move to Singapore, etc. But as Helen mentioned, actually we see a very clear reversal of trend in the past 6 months since the opening of Hong Kong. I mean, in fact, even for our organization, we have a few people who moved to other places are now moving back to Hong Kong. Because at the end of the day, right, Hong Kong, has really a very natural sort of package, I would say, from a work and from a living perspective, right? Obviously, we went through a very tough period of time during COVID, but that's now over, and I think people seize that, right? And that's why people will still look back to Hong Kong, right, as a place to work, right? So I think over time, as we continue, obviously, with the different government program put in place, I think we'll see more and more people looking at Hong Kong as a working venue, right? Because which place in the world can get such a great place to work with a very low tax rate, right? I mean, this is very, very unique, okay? From an internal perspective, I think it's important for us to continue to build the talents pool that we have in Hong Kong, working with the Hong Kong universities, as well as a different, resource programs, right? I guess on the finance side, just give you a few examples. I mean, ESG has been a very big topic for Hong Kong, and then we've been building a lot on the ESG perspective. So, obviously, HKMAO has been working with a number of financial institutions in what we call a capacity building program of how we can work with a lot of the Hong Kong local universities to build our own talent base, right, on ESG, right? So rather than keep finding people from Europe or elsewhere to come to Hong Kong, we can build up our own talent base. Obviously, this will take time, but then if we put this in place, that actually is further strengthen the Hong Kong available resources, right, to cope with the sort of increased talent need, right, from that particular area. We also work, with HKMA on a number of, so obviously local universities of the talent program, with the intern program coming to us. In fact, for us now, I think we hire, close to half of our new graduates from Hong Kong local universities, right? So, and obviously a lot of them is Hong Kong locals, some are from mainland China, but I think there's still a lot of local talent here, right? So how, I guess each company and in different industries can work with the different government-related entities in doing that, right? Building their own sort of, local talent base, and also, look at ways to also import talent, right, from outside is very important, and further address the sort of talent shortage issue that we have seen in Hong Kong.
Sorry, John. Sorry, I just want to add maybe one quick thing to what John already just said, and also connected to some of the questions, question 2 and 3 over here. People are asking if technology could help with the talent shortage and whether living in GBA could help. I definitely think so. I think people, especially after COVID, right, are more used to work from home, and at the time that when people see office as more as a foreign object nowadays, then I think for technology staff, they could probably feel free to work out of one area in GBA where housing is much more affordable, to actually participate in this technology boom in Hong Kong. And at the same time, how about making the GBA commute, more viable on a daily basis? I definitely think so. My husband works in Shenzhen with his virtual reality studio over there. And, would he prefer to live in Hong Kong? Yes, but do we have the people he has on art and on technology, on coding, on marketing? Probably not that easily, because they're facing the US. So actually he is doing all this commute, used to be on a daily basis, but it was very exhausting. So instead, we do now weekly. So maybe there is something that the government can make the transportation a much easier way to bring in technology from a different place. So that's another suggestion. Thank you.
Thanks. Thanks for the panelists. We still have a bit of time, and we already have a lot of questions streaming in. So I will encourage you, if you have questions, please raise your hand. And I will also now ask some questions submitted online. So the first question from the audience is, which city in the GBA do you think has the highest potential to invest?
I'm not an investor, but actually I'm traveling to a small city in the Greater Bay Area today. It's Zhongshan. It's called Zhongshan. Well, I was there for a couple of times, and I think the smaller cities in the Greater Bay Area, they have more convenient transportation than we would have imagined, and they have good living sort of environment to enjoy. So I think those cities are potential sites for people to consider. Yeah.
Well, as an economist, our job is not to advise people on investment either. I know it sounds crazy. Most people say economists will know, but no. Our job is to analyze the economic growth, inflation, and policy outlook, not necessarily to advise people to invest. But jokes aside, I would say that I probably want to bet on places like Zhongshan, Huizhou, and all Chaozhou, all these great places for retirement. It's more enjoyable that way. But actually, for developing your career, I would bet on a metropolitan, not one, but actually an area. So I think that Hong Kong and Shenzhen, you can, to a large extent, you can say, okay, Macau is part of it if you broaden that border a bit. But I would say, Hong Kong and Shenzhen is more or less more integrated and already becoming more like a one city. We talk about daily commute. We're talking about people crossing the border just for a show, for a concert. You don't see that all the time, right? Elsewhere, maybe in Europe because the border has already literally vanished. But then over here in this part of the world, in Asia, you rarely cross a border to see just a show, just for a meal, just to have a chat with someone who stops by. So we think that this is actually changing because both cities have tremendous, I would say, unique characteristics that the other one cannot replace with. Let's first talk about Hong Kong. I already mentioned the currency, I already mentioned the legal system, governance, as Professor Yan mentioned, and and also the culture part, very rich for this 7 million people city. But at the same time, if you look at Shenzhen, right, it also has a huge harbor. At the same time, with a lot of capacity to process the containers. At the same time, beyond the commercial point of view, also the Silicon Valley point that John just made, and as well as the fact that in Shenzhen, that's the only place in GBA. I'm sorry that I'm biased, but that's the only place when I go, I don't feel like people are judging me for not being able to speak Cantonese, right? So do you have another place in GBA that really you feel like anywhere you come from, China, it's okay? That's Shenzhen. Because in Shenzhen, if you speak Cantonese, people are like, wow, you are from, somewhere you can speak Cantonese. But if you speak Mandarin, it's okay. If you speak English, it's okay. Because everybody is an outsider. So I think that there are unique parts in both cities that make this particular metropolitan area very irreplaceable from the Chinese economic development point of view. Thank you.
So the answer is all of the above, right? So it really depends on what your preference is, just like where you want to live, right? I think there are a lot of merits in every single city in GPA for investments. There are merits to invest in Shenzhen, there are merits to invest in the Zhongshan, the more emerging cities, what you're looking for. I think so. I think if you want to really look at place to invest, you should really try to maybe pick a few places rather than just one location in GBA, because each one offers different characteristics and different focus, right? So I think that actually is I think the best approach, from a investing perspective.
Okay, we still have a lot of questions, but I only have time to ask the last one. I want to ask one that Helen just touched on, actually I will call it a thorny issue for Hong Kong. So this question is actually talking about Cantonese. Say that seems that Hong Kong people only use Cantonese. A lot of the, particularly for the mainlanders, when they come to Hong Kong, the language actually can become a conflicting point. Now think about that, Hong Kong, we want to build ourselves as the bridge between China and the Western world. But at the same time, there seems to be a lot of the cultural and even language issues that can easily turn into very confrontational and conflicting problems. So I wanted to ask how Hong Kong can really address this issue. Like Helen says, maybe today people find Shenzhen across the border is actually more accommodating. So if we can't solve this problem, how can we attract the brightest talent from China and from other parts of the world to live in Hong Kong?
First, I need to maybe put up a disclaimer. I was born and raised in Beijing, and after I graduated with my PhD from the US, I came to Hong Kong to start working in 2005. Since then, 18 years has gone by, and I've been working at 3 different American investment banks, and I still speak very little Cantonese. Well, I can understand 90% of it, so don't talk bad in front of me. I do understand, but I cannot pronounce it well, especially in front of people like my children who criticize me for not being able to tell the difference between a certain word and certain word. But I would say I never really felt like that was too much of my handicap while I was working here, building my career. Because Hong Kong, well, in the street, you probably will feel that, but in a professional environment, actually, I think the English language has been very much the focus. And also, I don't feel like that, you know, for example, Singapore, yes, everybody speaks English, but unless you speak English with the local flavor, the people don't see you as a local, right? But here in Hong Kong, if you speak English, regardless of with an Australian accent or a Chinese accent or American accent, doesn't matter. People still see that, okay, at least you speak English so we can communicate. So I think people are very down to earth. As long as we have a way to communicate with each other, that's okay. But I do want to caution that, which is, if you look at the history of global financial centers, you don't see another exception. That like Hong Kong, right, that it is a language that is prevalent in the city that is very different from the biggest market is coming from. You don't see that in New York, you don't see that in London, you don't get that from Frankfurt or Milan or Singapore or Dubai. So I think that maybe there is some more tolerance to be required so that we can allow more people who do not speak Cantonese to work over here and feel at home.
Thanks. Since we're running short of time, maybe John and Professor, maybe some very quick remark on this.
Yeah, just one last remark from me. I think we have seen a big sort of progression for Hong Kong, right, in terms of the language sort of barrier, right? I think if you ask me, right, for us, when we recruit people, we actually would favor people who speak Mandarin over Cantonese from a language perspective. So, and I think if you go walking around now, right, I think you hear a lot more people speaking Mandarin as well. So I don't really think language is now still a barrier. I think it's now very commonly used, like, you know, we see in school, we also teach Mandarin, etc. So I think this may be a problem, maybe I would say 20 years ago, but I think if you look at the progression Hong Kong has made in the past, 20 years, I think we have come a long way. And I think, I think people are as comfortable speaking Mandarin as in Cantonese or in English, across a group of people. Yeah.
Yeah, I just want to add one thing. I've been teaching and living in Hong Kong for 15 years. Language has never been a problem for me because I think people here speak all kinds of languages. One thing I want to say is that although language, probably when we consider language policy, we consider the convenience of doing business, but language is also part of people's identity, and it's also part of people's political, national identity, and so on. So I think when we consider language and language policy, we need to take very, very careful attitude in terms of determining what kinds of language should be used in the city, in addition to business convenience. That's my point. Yeah.
Thank you very much for your insight. And since now we're already behind, so thank you again. And I hope you all find it enjoyable.